Retro?
Go.
Fido?
Go.
Guidance?
Go.
Control?
Go.
Telcon?
Go.
Then we are go for launch initiating.
Separate.
I'm a little bit worried about you, Tom. Can you give me a diagnostic of your systems?
Can machines think? This is an enigma that was posited back in the 1950s by one of the fathers of modern computing. But even now, as technology takes quantum leaps forward and we begin to truly explore the depths of our own solar system, from Mars to the Galilean moons, any future space odysseys may lead us to return to this question, and even query our own free will and intelligence, be it artificial or otherwise, in the Turing Test.
Turing tests are tests designed to tell humans and machines apart.
Taking its name from Alan Turing's AI experiment, Bulkhead Interactive's first-person puzzler immediately feels like familiar ground to anyone who has ever set foot in the testing facilities of Aperture Science. Yep, just like Portal, you navigate your way through a series of sterile white rooms, interconnected by a maze of elaborate physics puzzles, all the time guided by an omnipresent computer intelligence whose motives and morality are somewhat questionable.
As the instrument of the ISA, I am the authority aboard this station.
You play as Ava Turing, an engineer for the International Space Agency, awoken from hypersleep by T.O.M, the expedition's AI, and then sent down to the surface of Europa to search for her missing crew.
Welcome to Europa.
Along the way you discover how and why the crew have disappeared, and why the outpost modules have been converted into these curious puzzle chambers. In searching the facility, you stumble across journal entries and audio logs from the crew. These give you some small insight into what has happened on Jupiter's frozen moon, but the real story is gradually revealed to you in your conversations with T.O.M as you move from room to room.
I've started to collate information from my local instance. It seems the crew intentionally cut communication with the satellite.
Why?
It appears we had a disagreement.
Now, without going into too many spoilers, I will say the narrative and writing isn't bad. There's nothing really here that hasn't been told 100 times before in countless other sci-fi movies, TV shows and books, but it does the job it sets out to do, and it even manages to touch upon some interesting philosophical themes for the digital age, like free will, evolutionary imperatives, and in a world increasingly more reliant on smart technology, are computers really making our lives better, or are we all just slaves to the machine? That said, rather than it all being some loving homage to the works of Arthur C. Clarke or Philip K. Dick, instead the Turing Test feels like, well, a cheap replicant, desperately trying to imitate real emotion. There are little subtleties and moments of foreshadowing in the dialogue, but the overall plot feels a little generic. The conversations between Ava and T.O.M, though well performed, lack any real spark and make what is meant to be a difficult moral choice at the end of the game feel kind of empty and lackluster. So much so, I actually just flipped a coin to decide which way I went in the end. But the story is only half the equation. It wouldn't be a puzzle game without a significant focus on the gameplay and problem solving. And, despite some occasional glimmers of potential here, it too feels like a shallow copy of something else. Like it's just rolled off the FPS puzzling production line, a robotic clone of those that have gone before. With an energy slinging gun in your hand, light bridges underfoot, and weighted cubes ready to be dropped on pressure pads, the Turing Test clearly finds it hard to escape Valve's genre-defining puzzler. Though, whereas Portal relied on momentum to carry you through the levels, the Turing Test does feel a little slower and more methodical, with some of the puzzles stretching through several rooms, forcing you to set up a cascade of triggers, or search every tiny little nook and cranny for those little glowing energy orbs that unlock the exit. But this is only with those larger puzzles. Even on some of the later levels, you can easily breeze through some of the chambers with barely any effort or thought. And this is before you gain the ability to hijack the room cameras, which, instead of adding a new complexity to proceedings, actually makes things a lot easier for the last third or so of the game. The difficulty spike and pacing for the game just seems to be wholly inconsistent. And despite feeling a lot slower than other games of its ilk, you will soon find yourself deep beneath the ice of Europa, watching the credits roll only after about 3 to 4 hours. And this does include those optional side puzzles that branch off each of the levels for anyone after a neat little in-joke or snagging those last few achievements. That said, I do think the game's length is pretty much spot on. It's long enough to tell the story the developers wanted to tell, but not so long as to feel bloated or for any of the puzzles to become overly repetitive. Also, as something of a side benefit, at least to myself, the game's brevity also means you won't be reaching for the Dramamine too often too. I don't particularly suffer from motion sickness, but there was something about those last few levels that made me feel a little queasy. It could have been flipping between the cameras or the slight throbbing of the screen as you breathe, or it could have just been me. But it is worth noting, if you do get motion sick, you may have to take a break every so often. And you may well be able to negate some of these effects by tweaking the field of view slider or motion blur in the game's ample settings, or turning down the mouse sensitivity or switching over to gamepad, though I would advise, if you're playing on PC, sticking with mouse and keyboard, as sometimes you need that greater precision in order to hit your targets on those timing based puzzles. One thing I haven't spoken about though is the way the game looks. The Turing Test truly is a feast for the eyes, and despite the odd low-res texture here and there, the team at Bulkhead have done a phenomenal job with the game's visuals and harnessing the power of the Unreal Engine. Even so, a pretty exterior can't really hide the fact that this is just a fairly mediocre game. Not bad, but not really bringing anything new or inventive to the genre. It may be worth checking out if you're a huge fan of games like Portal or the Talos Principle, but if you're making your first tentative steps into the first-person puzzling genre, then there are a host of other better titles out there for you to choose from. So, for me, the Turing Test picks up an indistinguishably average 4 out of 8 bits. With no real originality, this truly is an imitation game.
Do you think you'd pass the Turing Test?
I am quite capable of polite conversation. Wouldn't you say?
If you enjoyed this review, why not let us know by hitting that like button and subscribing to see more reviews and first impressions like this. And if you'd like to prove you're not some hyper-intelligent AI, why not start a pleasant conversation with us in the comments below or on any of the social medias over at the Kilobits. I've been John, this has been the Turing Test, and, at least until the robots take over, I will see you next time. Bye!